Hi everyone, so we're going to continue here talking with our food chains and food webs all about ecosystem ecology. So we're going to talk about some of the differences between these two things. So our food chain here is a linear series of food relationships. So these are going to be that line that you see. So when you think of food chains, I want you to think of a line. But our food web is going to show this overlapping connection between these food chains. So this is going to be more like a spider web, all intertangled and not very one shot that we see with our food chains. So let's take a look at those. So our food chains is the sequence in which energy is transferred from one organism to the next as another organism gets eaten. So it's really important to think about these food webs and food chains as that transfer of energy between one organism to the next. And we'll see the difference right here with our food chains. So with our food chains, we see this really nice line, nothing else intertangled. We see here is our primary producer. And then we see all of our consumers going from the top. One thing I really want to point out is the direction that the arrow is pointing. So when we go up through our food chain here, we're starting with our primary producers and moving up through our consumers. Our arrows are pointing upwards towards the next organism. So the arrow is pointing to the organism that is eating the one below. And it's also showing that transfer of energy from each animal to the next. So we can see with our algae, our primary producer, the energy from our algae is being transferred to our krill when it's eaten. Energy from our krill is being transferred to our toothfish when it's eaten. Energy from our toothfish is being transferred to our leopard seal. And then the energy from our leopard seal is being transferred to our killer whale as it's eaten. So that those arrows represent that transfer of energy. If they were in the opposite direction, that would be telling us that our seal here would be eating our killer whale, or that our krill would be being eaten by our primary producers, which is just not the correct sequence. So those arrows are going to be very important. So with our food web, we can see our original movement right here, but we also see all the other organisms in the community, in the ecosystem, also involved. So if we look here, we can follow our arrows to any organism in this food web. And it looks like all of them start again with this primary producer. So most of the time there are more than one primary producers in an ecosystem. In this case, we just have one, but you can see how it's connected to every food chain in this food web, which is good to see. So if we want to get a more clear definition of these food webs, it will almost always contain more than one food chain. So we saw that in our image just before. And our food web is showing many feeding relationships that are possible in an ecosystem. So it's not just showing one chain, it's showing many different relationships, and those chains can overlap with each other. And we'll see a better example of this in our lab. So now we're going to talk about how that energy is moving through our community or in our ecosystem. So an organism is ranked in a hierarchy called its trophic level. So if we take a look here at our different levels here, we can see producers is a trophic level, herbivores are a trophic level, omnivores is a trophic level, and carnivores is a trophic level here. So we're seeing that each one of these sections has its own level of energy. And our primary producers are always going to be our first trophic level in any ecosystem that we see, because we know our primary producers are going to be the ones making all of that energy for the organisms in our ecosystem here, because they're able to photosynthesize. They're making different sugars that the other animals are going to be able to use in one capacity or the other. But in general, we see that only 10% of this energy is moving through our trophic levels, which is going to be really important to realize. So if we see this energy transfer here, if we start with 1,000 joules of energy in our producers, only 10% of that is being transferred into our herbivores. So here we're only going to have 100 joules of energy. And again, only 10% of that is moving into our next trophic level. So that would be only 10 joules of energy. And again, only 10%, and we'll see only 1 joule of energy that's being transferred to that top tier. So we'll see that a lot of this energy is being lost to the environment as heat. So as we move up in our trophic levels, we're going to notice that in this specific example, we're going to see many less hawks in this community than there is grass or grasshoppers, because they're able to have more energy because they are lower in our trophic levels. So each step of an energy transfer, just like we were seeing with those different steps of our pyramid, is going to be a trophic level. So each step in our food chain or food web is known as a trophic level. So one step in a food chain or food web. So our examples here are producers, primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. So in that example that we just saw with our grasses would be our producers, our primary consumer would be our grasshopper, our secondary consumer would be that little bird, and our tertiary consumer is going to be the hawk all the way at the top. So let's talk about this again in the level of these pyramids. So each time energy is transferred, some is lost to heat. So we can see these little arrows showing over here, the energy that's being lost as we move up in our trophic levels. But we also see that energy transfer. Remember, it's 10% from each level. So if we have 1,000, we're only getting 100 here, only 10 here, only 1 here. So there's less energy available to these top level organisms that are going to be found in these higher trophic levels, which means that there's not going to be as many of those animals being able to survive in certain areas, which is why there's millions and millions of different plants on the planet, but our larger predators like hawks, like lions, there's not millions of those in existence. There's only a few within an ecosystem. So a really good way to visualize this is with our pyramid, because we can see at the bottom, our biggest piece here is our producers. The next biggest piece is going to be our primary consumers. Our next biggest piece is going to be our secondary consumers. And then our smallest piece at the top are those tertiary consumers that have the least amount of energy available to them. So this is where we are going to stop for today. If you have any questions, please email me and let me know.